Let us get started with session 14, session second of today. Right, so we got introduced to JavaScript yesterday and we knew what JavaScript can do, right? Let's take a look at them again. JavaScript can change HTML content, and that is one of our need in the application that we want to build. JavaScript can change HTML attribute values. Of course, we will require to set attribute values at times or change the existing attribute values. JavaScript can change HTML styles. Yes, maybe we will have a requirement to change the style dynamically. For example, if we want to show a done work or done task as a crossed one, that we can do by changing the text decoration style from none to strike through, right? So we can do that, or we will do that in our application. JavaScript can hide or show HTML elements. Yes, we may add a feature for filters. And in filters, we may say, well, hide all of the tasks which are in done state or which are crossed, or show me some tasks which are matching with, say, some word, or like that. And we can always show and hide elements in our application. You will have those use cases. And the most important thing is to react to HTML events. Like when I do a click on the button, add it to the list of tasks. When I click on a task item, mark it as done. When I click it again on a marked task or done task, unmark it. When I click on a button which says delete this task, it should delete. Like that, there will be many events that we will have to react through JavaScript in the current application. And as our applications will grow, it will be more and more useful to use JavaScript to handle such situations, right? Now, to do all that, we will have to understand something which is called document object model, because document object model and the application of that in HTML is called HTML DOM, of course, or short form for document object model is DOM. That gives you a programmatic way of accessing HTML content. Okay, so what is HTML DOM? We will learn that, but before that, let's understand what DOM is. It's a W3C standard. W3C stands for World Wide Web Consortium, and they are the body who manages all specifications about HTML, CSS, DOM, XML, etc., etc. A lot of things which are related to web are maintained and decided actually, or standards are set by the consortium called W3C. And this is how they have defined DOM. They say W3C DOM is a platform and language neutral interface that allows programs and scripts to dynamically access and update the content, structure, and style of a document, right? And these are the things that we want. We want to do what? Update the content, update the structure, and update the style of the document. And DOM is the way to do it via programs and scripts. And JavaScript is a programming language that we are going to use in this case. So we need to have HTML DOM so that JavaScript can access the DOM and do whatever is required. So when a web page is loaded in the browser does what? It creates a DOM of the page. DOM of the page. If you recall the very first day when I showed you a source code of HTML page, it started with a declaration called doctype HTML. Then there was a HTML tag, and inside that rest of the tags were there. So HTML had a head tag, and head had a title and many other things. Then there was a body tag, and body has rest of the content, right? So this whole structure is loaded by browser, or rather it is represented or converted into DOM once the page is loaded. And that DOM, based on the definition, is available to programs and scripts to dynamically access and update the things, right? Now we will need to know what are those objects that are available to us and what are the ways to access and update the content structure and style, right? So HTML DOM model is constructed as a tree of objects. The tree of object means there will be a root object and the rest of the elements will be branches and further branches and further branches like that. So you can traverse the tree and then you can always get hold of one of the elements that you are looking for, and then on that element you want to do something, like you want to change the content, you want to add or remove the elements, child elements, or move this element from this branch to some other branch, or you want to change the styles and the rest of the attributes, etc. So that is possible using the APIs that will be exposed through the objects. So representation or a schematic visualization of this tree of objects is like this. At the root, there will be an object called document. The whole web page is loaded, and first root element or root object that is created is called document. Okay, and below that you will have the root element. Root element is the topmost element. Now, like I said earlier, and you have seen it, the first element that you will generally see in HTML page is a HTML tag. And then it will have head tag, it will have body tag, and head will have few things, body will have few other things. Head will usually have title, meta, script, link, style. These are the elements that you will see in under head. Then body will have everything that is for the visualization. So it will have h tags, it will have div tags, span tags, p tags, form, inputs, etc., etc., and a lot of text too, right? So this is the hierarchy that we have been seeing. Now take a look at the code that we were creating. What we have created so far is a form in this, and then form has a text area, and then text area has a text, and then form has a BR, form has an input and BR, and input and BR, and lot of input BRs, and then a select, and select has option, and option has a text, right? So it creates the hierarchy, and of course form could have been put up inside a body, and body was to be put up in HTML. By default, that is the structure that is expected. However, you can always work around things, or few of the elements are basically optional. In good, valid HTML structure, everything should fall into this. It should appear like this: doc type, HTML, and then HTML tag, and there should be a closure of HTML, of course. And then what? You have to have a head tag. Inside HTML, you should have a head tag and a matching closure of head. And then you should have a body tag and a matching closure of body. And then whatever content that we wanted to show on the screen, which is basically this form, should have been a child of this. Okay, so now you can easily imagine this to be a hierarchy. Let me create the indentation appropriately so that you can see this hierarchy. If I just close this, everything is closed, and then HTML has head and body, right? Only two things. And then body has a form, and then form has the rest of the things that we just talked about. So it is a tree structure. HTML page is always a tree structure. Okay. So DOM is built as a tree for HTML. The root element or root object, there is a root element versus root object. So root object is document, and document will have a root element, and root element will have a reference to the rest of the elements that is on the next level, and that goes on and on. Okay, now we want to actually know the ways of accessing these objects and the content of these objects. So what we are going to do is we are going to use the HTML DOM programming interface, correct? And these are the things that are available to us very quickly. So the first level things are to identify an element. I have to identify an element because unless until I get hold of the HTML element, I can't really do anything with the element. So the first requirement will always be to get hold of the element. And how do I do that? There is a ready-made object named document. Remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. So you have to be very careful about the things that you are writing. If you change the spelling, it may not work for you completely. So you have to be very careful about the spellings that you are going to use. And it is not the spelling that has to be as per the English grammar, but the grammar that is proposed or maintained by the HTML specification, JavaScript library specification, and the names that you will be defining on the fly or during your programming. So everything has to be treated appropriately. In most cases, you will be very sensitive, or your code will be very sensitive about the case of the words that you are using, right? Title case or uppercase or lowercase. So you have to be very careful. Okay, so the methods that are available for finding an element are available basically on an object called document. Remember, D small letter. Document has various methods, various getter methods, and three of them are listed here. The most commonly used one is get element by ID. And we have used that in our earlier application. So let me go to the application that we did not build the application. We used that in our page yesterday. So let me go to that code, and then you will realize what we did. Okay, so this is the page about this one, and where we said when you press on this, it shows this particular section. When you press on the second button, it identifies the second section and displays that, and then third, and like that, right? How is it doing? How is it doing? How is it knowing that, okay, I have to hide or set the display property for this section to none versus block, right? So it has to first get hold of the element. So let's see how it is done in the code. So divs that we had, like the first section, I'm not interested in the first section, but I'm interested in second, third, and fourth. So second section has an ID info. Third section has an ID job. Third section has an ID job. Fourth section has an ID edu. Okay, so these are the unique identifiers given to these div elements. Now for these div elements, if I change the display style, then the whole content of this div will be visible or not visible, depending on what value we set for the style, for display style, correct? So I have to first get hold of this element on runtime. And how do I do that? I used this function called document.getElementById, and then dynamically pass the ID value, correct? So this is the function that we used earlier, and once we get hold of the element, of course, getElementById is going to give me reference to only one element. Why? Because we assume that ID is unique for each element. So by one ID, I will get reference to maximum one element. And if that element is found, then I can access that element's properties or do whatever that I want to do with that element. Okay, so we have used this function earlier, and we are going to use this again in our new application. What we are going to do is, when we press the button add, what I have to do is get hold of the input box element and then read the value from there, correct? So let's do this together. Let's start using the function right away. So my example has to come. So this is my code, okay, and this is my input box, okay. And what's the application? Let me go to the application that I just showed you, and I will start implementing them. So what I want actually is, when I click on this add, it should get hold of this input box and then read the value, correct? For the time being, this is what I want to do. So first step is to get hold of this input element. And how do I do that? And even before that, I have to do a handling of the action, correct? So on click of what? On click of the button, correct? I can write the JavaScript here itself, okay, but it is not a good practice to write the full JavaScript here. Rather, define your logic as a function in a script section. So script, I have added a script tag, and then I will write a function. So a function is nothing but a piece of code with a name, and then I can make use of that, or I can execute that piece of code again and again. So I say read input, okay, and I'm just using some convention to define a function. I will explain you how the functions are defined little later, but just accept that this is a function that will have the rest of the logic. And what I'm doing here is, on click, I'm calling this function, okay. On click, call this function. As a convention, I should also put a semicolon, but that is not necessary if this is the only statement that I'm putting in the event handler. Now what is event handler basically? So click is the event, and then I'm saying on click. So on is the prefix. So on the event, on certain event, I want to do something. So I said, well, that event happened, and on that event, I want this logic to get executed. So at the value of on some event will be basically a JavaScript logic. And what I'm going to do here, instead of writing the full logic here, I make a call to a function, and that function is defined separately. Fine. So to make it simple, I can use first thing first. I can use a ready-made function which will say alert. Reading alert is basically a ready-made function which will pop up a dialog and which will print the message that you have passed in to alert function. So now what I'm going to see is this. When I refresh, of course, after the change, I have to refresh the page. When I simply press the add button, it will show me a dialog like this. And what is the thing that is showing up here? The value that I have passed into the alert. So that is showing up here as reading input. Fine. Now what I want is I want to get hold of this particular element. And the function that is available for that was document dot get element by ID. Keep note of the case sensitive nature. You have to type it exactly this way. So G small letter, E capital letter, and then B capital and I capital, and everything else as small letters. So you have to be very careful. And it accepts the ID of any element that I'm looking for. Now I have specified this ID to this input box, and I have to ensure that this is unique, so that whenever I make a call to get element by ID, only this element should be available. Okay, so I am putting this. Now this will give me the input elements reference. So I say input. Fine. If you are not able to understand the syntax, not to worry, we will learn about the syntax very soon. But the purpose is using this function call, function which is available in document. I'm making call to this function, and by passing the ID, what will happen? This DOM will get me a reference to this input, and then I can access anything on this element, or I can set anything that is a possibility on this. What I am interested in, the value that is typed in the element. So I can get that by just saying input dot value. Now I can again alert. So it will print whatever is typed in. Pretty simple for now. I'm testing this. So I said read value of input. If this is what I wanted, input, okay, and I press add, it first shows me the first dialog, and then when I say okay, it moves ahead, and now it is showing me the value that was typed in this box. Correct? So this is doing the work that I wanted. Now this value is available to me. The next thing would be to add it to the second section. Okay. So this is one way of getting hold of an element, and that's the most common way. Find an element by element ID. Now there could be other requirements like find elements by tag name. Say I want to know of all p tags or all input tags and all, say, any tag by its name. Of course, there will be many such entries possible. There could be many P's, many table, many TDs. So it will give me a list of elements, right? Third thing could be by the class name. That means an element whose class property will have this value of the CSS class. You know what CSS class is, and you use that to set certain style class on an element. And if you want to know of all elements which have got this class applied, you can do that. But second and third are less used ways than the first one to get hold of any element. Okay. So we got the element and we got the value from that element right now. We got hold of the input tag or input element, and then we are able to read the value, and the value is what? That was typed in by the user. So when I type in and I press the add button, it shows me a dialog where it shows me what I basically typed inside the input box. So that value is now accessible to my code. The next thing will be to put it inside the UL, right? UL, the unordered list that is below the first box. In the second box, we have a UL. So I have to get hold of UL. I have to create a LI. I have to set the value to LI, and then that LI should be added to the UL, right? Pretty simple. So we are going to do these things. First, create an LI, set the text to LI, text that I have just read from the input box, and then that LI has to be added to UL. So I have to get hold of UL tag, and then I will say UL, here is your child. So add the child. Now to do all of these, I have to have a way to modify the construct of the page, right? I want to create an element, like in this case I want to create a li element. I have to append child, and where I have to first get hold of the ul so that I can append a child to that ul. The li has to be a child of the ul. It's a hierarchy, so ul contains many li's, so I have to add. So we will not remove for now, we will not replace for now, but there are other situations where we will have to remove. And basically we will have to remove for now because there is one element by default added, so I have to remove that element too. Okay, so we will not add that remove requirement for the time being, but we will use the create and we will use the append child. Okay, so create element is a method again available on document itself. Document dot create element, and by giving a tag name, because elements are created using its tag name, so I pass in a tag name and it creates a new element, and then I can add many properties or set properties, add content to the element, etc., etc. And once that element is fully ready, then I attach to its parent in the whole tree so that it is placed in the right position in the whole tree. Okay, so I created an li, and li must be present inside a ul or ol. So I find the right ul or ol and then attach the li there. Okay, so we have a create element. So let's now try that. And what I'm going to do for that, I'm going to get hold of the first, let's create the element. Okay, so I do create element, and what I am creating is an li. Li in lowercase or uppercase will not matter. So it creates an element, and I say where li is created, list item is created. Okay, fine. Now I want to add the text that I have read earlier into the li. So I do what? I say li dot inner HTML. Inner HTML. It's a property, inner HTML. I have to be careful whether this is HTML is lowercase or uppercase. I will just verify, and let me quickly verify that instead of making mistake. Let's quickly verify. HTML is capital letter. Okay, so I'll use that correctly here. This is very important because, as I said, JavaScript is case sensitive. So if I use a different word, even with this case change, it will not work as I expect. Okay, so in the inner HTML of li, basically inner HTML is what? The internal content or inner content of an element. So I'm saying use input value as the inner content of li. That means value, that is text, is becoming a child of li. And now I have to get hold of the UL. And how will I find the UL? Once again using document dot get element by ID, correct? And the ID of the UL has to be uniquely specified. So I go down and find what is the ID for this UL. Okay, so this is what I have. Now I have the UL, I have the li created. So I will say UL now append a child li to yourself. Okay, so UL will have a child li appended. Now let's go back on the page and see what happens. So I refresh and I say simply task 1 and I press add. It shows me the dialogues because I have not yet removed them, and task 1 is that what I entered and got it. And now the last thing, task 1 now appears in this UL, correct? So my application is ready. My application is ready. I add another one, another task, and press add. It shows me these couple of dialogues and it confirms that the thing that I typed is being read, and that gets added.
We can make this like a timetable.
Yes, so I am getting my whole application requirement completed this way. So quick and so easy, right? So what we did basically is 3 things. We defined an action handler or event handler on the add button. So I had a button, I added event handler for the click event by saying on click do this. And what to do? That was a function defined separately. I could have written the entire code there, but it will make it clumsy. So function is an easy way to write a bunch of logic or bunch of statements, give it a name, and then in all other places make a call by name so that actually the logic that you wanted to execute gets executed. But the advantage with functions are that you can make a call to that function in many places, plus it is written separately so that it is separated from the rest of the HTML or styling, and then you know exactly what you wanted to do, correct? And in that event handler logic, I'm doing 2 things. First, get hold of the input element so that I can read the value of that element, and that will give me what? The thing that I typed in. And then create an li which has to be appended to the UL. And when I am creating an li or li element, list item element, I use document dot create element by passing li. It created the li. On li, I set a property called inner HTML by doing what? The value that I read from the input box. So my li is now ready, and I had to append that to UL. So to do that, I had to first get hold of the UL, and I'd use the same old function get element by ID on document to get the UL, of course, by specifying the right ID. I got the UL, I have built the li. So on UL, I'm saying UL dot append child, and the li gets added to the UL, and that is how it is showing up in the next box. Right. So JavaScript is so simple, so easy, and it using DOM, it gives us a whole lot of options to manipulate the content or structure or style of the HTML page. Okay, so let's move forward. We have used a few of the features so far, and we are going to use more of them. So we have used get element by ID, we've used to create element, we used append child, but there are many options. And we are going to use them as and when there will be a requirement. Okay, so we will not worry right away on all other functionalities, but we are aware that there are functionalities available for removing a child, for appending a child, for replacing a child, and many other things. And we have other ways of finding an element too. All right. Document object provides a whole lot of ready-made properties. We have not used any properties so far. We only used a couple of functions, which is get element by ID, create element, but there are plenty of properties available to get hold of various parts of the document. Document is what? The entire web page. So we can use these ready-made properties to get hold of various elements. I'm not going into the details right now because as I practice, I will go back and refer to this list and find out only if I need something. So it's just for knowledge that there are plenty of ready-made properties available on document which can be useful later. For example, knowing the document's title, I can use document.title. All right. So let's now take a look in the elements. We just created an element dynamically and added to another element. We have been getting hold of element, but what is element? So element is, as you know, it's one or the other HTML tag which is present in the DOM as an object in the hierarchical or tree structure of the web page. And how do you get hold of an element? By getter methods, get element method defined on document. So you pass the ID, you pass the name, or you pass the class name. That is how you identify, find an element and get hold of it. Okay. Now elements will have many properties and many methods. Some of the methods that we have used or seen earlier are create element, but create element will always be useful on document. But append child, replace child, remove child, right? All of those were on a particular element. Like we took control of the UL element and then appended the child. Now elements will also provide few features, and we have used one of them, which is inner HTML. Element content will be accessible through inner HTML. And if you want to just get the inner HTML or you want to write on the inner HTML, you can use this property. Similarly, there are other properties available which are depending on the element. Like we have used value property from the input element. Value property may not be present on LI, may not be present on OL or UL, but OL will have type property, right? LI will have a style property, LI will have a class property. So those attributes can be accessed directly using element reference dot the name of the attribute. For example, style property, element dot style. And then style has many other properties, right? Style is a bunch of key value pairs, property and value. So I can access any property like display element dot style dot display. And that is what we did in earlier example where we were setting the display to none or block for a div element. Okay, so that we can do. And a formal way of setting an attribute's value is through a set attribute function where we say element set attribute and then I say attribute name and attribute's value. Or we can use the element dot attribute equal to syntax too. Okay, now we have talked a lot about ready-made functions, ready-made features, attributes, everything in DOM. And we have started using that in JavaScript, but we need to know the syntax of JavaScript, the basic grammar of JavaScript. Without that, it will be difficult. We have used var, we have used function, etc., etc. How is that going to work, and how is that actually working for me for now? So let's get deeper inside JavaScript. What is JavaScript? As you know, it's a programming language for HTML and the web pages, right? And JavaScript basically will have two things: variables and operators. Of course, there are more concepts, but the first and most important thing in JavaScript will be variables. And what is variable? It is used to store data values. Like we define variables to remember the reference to an element, input element. We define variables to remember a reference to an element for UL. And we will be creating many other variables whenever there is a need. So variables are used to store data values. And how do we do that? We'll come to that. But before that, let's understand about operators. So variables will also be put together with operators to compute some new values. So operators are used to compute new values, or maybe just assign new values or new data values or existing data values to a variable. So variables and operators put together makes the main logic or the program. Okay, so you will always have variables and operators acting together to build the whole logic. And an example is like this. So where is the keyword that is generally used, although it is an optional keyword. You are not required to use where, but you can use where keyword. Now keyword is something interesting. There are certain words that are reserved in a programming language, and that's a common practice in many programming languages. It's like punctuation marks. Say you want to use you want to indicate that it's a full stop. In Hindi you do it in certain way, in English you do it in certain way, and you will generally not use that for any other purpose. So similarly, programming languages have a whole bunch of reserved words because each of them has a special meaning for the execution environment. So where is one of those words, and you will not use where for any other purpose than declaring a variable. And what is a variable? It is basically an alphanumeric word that you create. It's your creation. Variable names like X, Y, Z that you see here are your names given to the data that will be associated with them. Okay, it is like suppose you name someone Jay. Jay means what? Jay indicates a person who is a 10-year-old boy, studies in DPS. Correct? So as soon as you think of Jay, you may be thinking of some value associated with Jay, right? So similarly, you define variables, and you define variables by first naming them, and when you define and declare the variable, you prefix it with keyword var j. Now at this stage, the value associated with j is nothing. Now in this case, var x, y, z. The variables are declared, but x has nothing, y has nothing, z has nothing. So these are empty variables. That means these variables are declared but not having any value. Now in the second line, x is equal to y, 5, and y is equal to 6. What we are doing basically is saying, well, x, you will have a value 5. So we are assigning a value 5 to x. Now equals is an operator. So equals is an assignment operator. So you are now having variables and operators used together. You are also seeing some punctuation marks like comma and semicolon. Semicolon is to end a statement. Now in JavaScript, you can end the statement by just putting a next line character, so that the things that are starting from a next line, a fresh line, is treated as a fresh statement. Or if you want to write more than one statements on same line in a text file, then you have to put a semicolon to indicate that the statement has ended. So it is an optional, but it's a good practice to use semicolon to indicate that this statement is ending. Say for example, I wrote two statements, x equal to 5 and y is equal to 6. These are two distinct things. I assigned value 5 to x and I assigned 6 to y, and both are written on the same line. If I don't say semicolon after 5, x equal to 5, it will be misinterpreted. So it will be assuming that x is equal to 5, y is equal to 6 in continuation with just a space in the middle, invalid. It will be not understood by the execution environment. So once we say x is equal to 5 semicolon and then write something else, the first part is evaluated properly. 5 will be assigned to x. The third one is a computation and assignment. So two operators are in action here. The first thing is x plus y. So operation begins from the right hand side. So x plus y is evaluated first. So what's the current value of x here? The execution happens in sequence. That means the first line will be executed first and then second line and third line, like that, right? The execution is always sequential. So x has got a value of 5, y has got a value of 6, and then in the third statement what we are doing, x plus y. That means value of x added to value of y. Plus indicates the arithmetic addition or sum. So value of x, which is 5 at the moment, and value of y, which is 6 at the moment, are getting added. So 5 plus 6, and that evaluates to what? 11. Now that 11 is the value of x plus y as a whole, and that is now being assigned to z, because z equals x plus y, means z is being assigned a new value computed through x plus y. So at this stage, z will get a value of 11. Okay, and this is how the whole logic proceeds. So it will, the logic will be built using variables and operators, and you will see them quite a lot. There are many operators available. Variables, as I said, it will be defined by you. So you can define a variable. Remember to create a unique variables. Remember to follow the naming conventions. We will talk about naming conventions sometime later when we will actually start defining variables. But the simple convention is it should be a single word. Now, without spaces, variables cannot have spaces. Variables cannot have the numeric thing at the first place, like 1, 2, 3, 4 cannot be put up at the first as the first letter. There are only few special characters like dollar and underscore allowed in the variable name. You cannot use spaces, you cannot use minus, etc., because minus is one of the operators, so that will get things confused, right? So there are some restrictions and some conventions that should be followed. Like if you are defining a variable which is actually multi-word, the first word should start with a lower case letter, and all other words should start with uppercase letters. So it together it reads like a camel case, which is like first word lowercase, the second word starts with uppercase without spaces, so it is easily readable. So that's the convention again. So there are certain rules, there are certain conventions. Okay, so back to operators. there are a bunch of operators for performing arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and exponentiation, that is power function, and finding the modulus or remainder, and increment or decrement. Now, just increment and decrement are special things that we will use in few occasions. All of them placed put together are called arithmetic operators. And we have seen one example at least here, which is x plus y. Okay, so values of x and y are pulled and added together, and that new value is assigned to z in this case. Equals is an assignment operator. Do we have other operators? Yes. So we have some comparison operators. Two equal signs. One equal sign means assignment. Two equal signs means equality check. So if I say z equals x, the result will be no, because z at the moment now, after these three statements are executed, has got a value of 11 while x is 5. And when I say z equals x, no, the result will be false. So equals and comparison operators will result into either true or false, a boolean, yes or no, right? So comparison is being done. So double equals, triple equals, exclamation sign equals means not equals, exclamation sign double equals, greater than, less than. Each of them has its distinct meaning and purpose, and you will have to understand that and most likely remember, so that you can create appropriate computations and what is technically called expressions. So x plus y, for example, in the third statement in given example, is an expression. If you're familiar with mathematics, you know what expression is and what is equation. Okay, so this is the comparison operators. Then we have some logical operators. Logical operators are similar to comparison, but it has different interpretation. This will be usually used in certain decision making situations. Okay, and decision making situations, ampersand is like both parts. There will be two parts, of course. It can be two variables or it can be two expressions, but each expression should first result into a boolean, right? So it is like first you use the comparison operator and then put them together and decide whether both are true or both are false, or one of them are true or one of them are false, like that. So double and or double ampersand says and, that means the first one is true and the second one is also true. Or means the either first one or the second one or both are true. So any of the two are true. Okay, so two operands and one operator indicates in first case both operands are true individually. In the second or case or double pipe, it indicates either of these can be true and both can also be true. An exclamation sign is saying logical not. That means the operand, if operand is true, the not on operand will make it false. If the operand is false, the not on that operand will make it true. So it will switch the value and it will check for that. Okay, so we are going to use these operators quite a lot. Then we have few more, which is to help understand the type of the data variable. Now, when we are dealing with variables, sometimes we don't know what type of data is stored against that variable. JavaScript is loosely typed. That means the type of the value may change, or rather it is always decided at the runtime. When we defined a variable xyz, in this case, we didn't know that we are going to assign numeric values or numbers to x, y, or z. It became obvious only in the second and third statement. And interestingly, I can change the value to any other type also at a later time. So right now x, y, z, all three have numbers, and at any point of time I can set it to string or text or date or something else. So type of is an operator which is quite useful in situations where we want to know, okay, what is the value type at this point of time for the given variable. Similarly, when we are not having a simple variable but a complex variable, what complex variable will be, we will talk about in a while, but complex variables are defined or known as objects in JavaScript, and then we can see if the object that I have represented by a variable is an instance of some specific object type. Say I want to know if the data that is represented by a given variable is of type date or not, or of a custom type like a custom type that I define, say car, or I define a object like person. So instance of will be useful on objects, type of will be useful on a simple variable. Okay, so we will be using them occasionally. These operators are quite useful. There are a few more operators available in JavaScript, but we are not going to talk about all of them. These are the most commonly used ones, so I have listed them here. Okay, so now let's take a look at the data types that are possible in JavaScript. A minute ago, I told you that JavaScript is loosely typed. That means a variable that you declare, you need to not define the type of value that will be referred by that variable. Variable is what? It is referring or storing to a data value. Now, what is the type of value? It can be number, it can be text, it can be image, it can be binary data, it can be a complex data, right? But I don't specify the type of the variable initially, and it is evaluated on runtime actually when the value is assigned to the variable. But there are still some types that are possible in JavaScript. Some of the types which are very commonly used and very simple are called primitives. And if you have a complex data type, which is made up of combination of multiple primitives or multiple other complex types, then that is called object. Okay, so let's take a look at data types possible in JavaScript. As I was explaining, JavaScript has dynamic types. That means the variable's value can hold different data types, and the type is defined at runtime, or type is detected at runtime. A primitive data value is a single simple data value with no additional properties and methods. For example, a number, a simple number. It is just a value. It will not have other properties unless until I say, well, this number indicates some physical measurements like length or height or weight or volume, because then it will have units associated with it. Okay, so if it is just a number, it's just a number, it is just a text, I am not qualifying it with some other properties and other methods. Methods are basically what? Ways to act on the data. Properties are what? Associated data, or the constituents of the primary data. Okay, so if there is a simple data value without any additional properties and methods, no extras, then that is called primitives. And some of the primitives that are known are string, number, boolean. And one thing interesting is called undefined. So undefined is a situation where you actually did not specify any value. So if you recall the previous screen, here in the first statement, I said var xyz, and at this stage I have not really assigned any value to x, y, and z. So what is the type of xyz at this stage? Undefined, right? So that is a common type that is assigned by default to any variable until unless it has started pointing to a particular value of a certain type. So at any point of time, if you want to remove the value, you can assign undefined. Undefined is also a keyword which will nullify or remove the data type association on a variable. We will use that quite a lot in our application. The second one is called complex type or object, and that will have what? Additional properties and methods. So as soon as a data value gets more properties and methods, it becomes complex. It is no more a simple value like a text or a number or a Boolean yes, no kind of thing. And two types of complex data possible in JavaScript. One is called function, another is called object. We have also already started using function, and we are going to use objects. We are actually using objects also, like document is an object, element is an object, because you have observed document has many properties, document has many methods, properties like inner HTML, right? And methods like get element by ID, create element, append child, etc., etc. So those are making the document data type more complicated, and so it is a complex data or object. Function, on the other hand, is something that we defined in our logic, and there we use a term called function, a keyword called function, and then we define few things. As function will have many things. Function will have the name of the function, function will have parameters, function will have a return type, function will have the body, so on and so forth. So it's not a simple data type or data value like string, number, or Boolean. It is made up of many primitives or some other complex types. So we'll take a look into function in a while, but before that, let's understand a little more about undefined. A variable without a value has the value undefined, right? I explained you in earlier screen, the first statement, x, y, z are having a value undefined, and the type is also undefined. The value is undefined, type is undefined. So whenever you set a value, any variable's value to undefined, the type also becomes undefined. So it's a keyword and it's a type too. Any variable can be emptied by setting the value to undefined. Yes, and the type will also become undefined. Now there is another keyword called null, and null indicates nothing. So technically saying both are same, right? A variable which is pointing to nothing is undefined. A variable pointing to null is also to be nothing, but null has a different interpretation in JavaScript. The data type of null is an object. So data type of a variable which is set to having a value undefined, the type of that is undefined, while for any variable which is set to null, the data type of that will be object. So that's a little difference, and it will be quite useful in some situation. So undefined and null are equal in value because both are pointing to nothing. The value associated with the variable which is assigned to undefined or having assigned null is pointing to nothing, but their underlying data type are different. In case of undefined, the type is undefined. In case of null, the type of the variable is object. Okay, let's take a look at some comparisons, and this is what you will see. You may not understand it, no problem. You will understand it gradually once you start using undefined and null in different scenarios. So we talked about function and we have used function also. So let's take a quick look in the functions in JavaScript. And what is function? Function is basically a block of code designed to perform a particular task. Like we did what? We said add a task into the list. That was a thing that we wanted. And so read the input and add it to the list. Fine. That is a block of code that we wrote. Now, how do you declare a block of code? That is important. So let's take a look at the common syntax. It starts with the keyword function. So function keyword indicates that I'm going to write something which should be treated like a block of code, a reusable block of code. Then after the function keyword, you will have the name of the function. Now name has to follow the rules and conventions that you generally follow for a variable. So the same rules and same conventions are applicable for naming a function too. And what you have to basically do is it should indicate the purpose or the task that you wanted to execute or perform through this function call. And then you have a pair of parentheses, small brackets. So name followed by a pair of parentheses, and inside the parentheses you can have zero or many variables, comma separated list of variables. Those will be considered like inputs to the function. So when you make a call to the function, you can pass various data values or variables which will be substituted or made equivalent to the sequence variable. So first data value that you pass in will become the value replacement for the first parameters, the second value will become reference to the second, and like that. So you can set a list of parameters in the parentheses by separating them using comma. A comma separated list of variables makes the parameter list. And then you have a pair of curly braces where you actually write your code, right? Your logic is inside the pair of curly braces. That is the general syntax. And if you now observe the code that we wrote, it follows that. So I have a function keyword, a name of the function, and a pair of small bracket or parentheses. Now in this case, I have not put any parameters, which is quite okay, but you will always have to have a pair of parentheses, even if there are no parameters to pass. This is the syntax. And then a pair of curly braces, and rest of the content or rest of the code is inside the pair of curly braces. When I use the name or define the name of the function, I have followed the rule as well as convention. So I said read input. So user's input is being read, and it is additionally doing what? It is adding to the task list. Okay, so I can make it more relevant. So it is not just reading the input, it is adding the content to task list. So I may like to change it, but okay. But when you change the function name, you will have to change it all other places also where you have used them or referred them. And where have I used this function? I have used this in the on-click event handler. Okay, so if I make a change in the name of the function there, I will have to make change in all other places where the function is being called. Okay, so here the function was defined, and here the function is being executed or called. And to execute the function, I don't use the name, the keyword function. I just use the name of the function and then pair of parentheses. And if I have to pass arguments or the equivalent of parameters, I can put those values or variables or expressions. Comma separated, of course, here as well, so that it matches one-on-one to the parameters that are defined in the function or listed in the function definition. Correct? So this is how we define a function. And a function is what? It is a bunch of code that will be executed to perform a task, right? So code has to be executed, and one way of execution was event handler, as event handler. So we said when an event occurs, like a user clicks a button, and we have invoked. We can invoke JavaScript function in other places also, like we are making call to some other functions, like this function is defined on this object, and I can call that function from within another function, or I can define more functions and then I can call those functions from other functions. So a function can call another function and that can become a chain or cycle. So we can do that. A function can be called from another function, or a function can be invoked automatically. That is a very rare situation, but it is done quite a lot when we are defining the function and executing it right away. So I define the function and I say this. That will define the function as well as execute it. It is as good as writing read input like this. So it's a shortcut that is possible when we define a function and we execute it right away. So it will automatically execute. So there are various ways of executing a function. An example of function is here, but we have already seen a more complex example. So the function keyword, name of the function, and couple of parameters A and B. And then inside the body, I'm saying A multiplied by B. That means a multiplication operator between A and B. So whatever value is available in A and B, that gets multiplied. And then I'm using a return keyword. Return will do what? It will give back the last calculated value or value that is after the return. Okay, so a function can return a result. And that result can be, of course, stored against another variable or can be used in another expression. And where is that function getting called? In the earlier statements, where it is saying my function, and then in the parenthesis, it is passing two values 4, 3. So 4 will be mapped to A, 3 will be mapped to B because of their position, the first variable to first value, second variable to second value, and like that. And so when the execution of function happens, A is substituted by 4 in this case, B by 3, and 4 and 3 are getting multiplied. So 4 multiplied by 3, which is 12, is returned from this function because of the return keyword. And return keyword actually stops the execution of the code body, and then the call goes back, or the execution goes back to the caller. So the value returned by this function is 12, and that is now being assigned to variable X. Right. Now, this is another interesting thing where the functions are getting defined and functions are getting executed. Usually, the function should be defined before the function is executed. Otherwise, your function definition is not available to the execution environment. So sometimes it may be a problem if you define a function later than the call, it may not work. Basically, it is on the sequence of loading. What is being loaded before the other? So that is something that you will have to be careful about in future, and you will know how to manage that with practice. Okay, so functions can be used the same way as one use variables in all types of expressions, assignments, and calculations. So this is like an assignment thing here. I call the function, and then whatever is the return is being assigned. I can use it in some other expressions and some other calculations too. So functions is one more special thing about function is that it is a data substitute. So it is one of the data types, right? We saw earlier. So wherever there is a need of a data to be passed in, I can pass the function itself. So when I just pass the name of the function definition itself goes in as the data object, and then I can ask for the name of the function, of course, the parameters and the body, etc., etc., and additionally, I can execute that function when that is available as an argument. Okay, the next part is object, but I will stop here because it's going to take a little more time to explain object and rest of the things about object. I will hold on to it for tomorrow. We will start our tomorrow's session from object, but what we are going to do is we are going to think of use of objects, a custom object in our application. So come back to the application. What we did today, we completed the task list creation. So we are able to now add new task and show it up here. But this is looking so naive. What I will do tomorrow, I will say, well, for the task that I am creating, I just don't want a task name, but I may want to show a task description, and I may also set a time, due date or due time for this task, right? So I will do what? I will make this form a little more complicated. So when I think of a task, it will not simply remain a primitive type like a text. It will become a little complicated, and it will have a label or a short name and then long description and a due date. Maybe at least 3 properties will make one task. Now, as soon as I will think of a task, I will think of 3 properties associated with that. That indicates I'm not going to deal with a simple object type or simple primitive value, but it is going to become a complex object. Okay, and then we will learn how to deal with objects in JavaScript, how to define objects, how to refer the pieces and portions of the object. And when I will have multiple instances of the object, like we will be creating multiple tasks, we are creating multiple tasks, how can I deal with multiple copies of the same type of data? Maybe using arrays, and how arrays are different or similar to objects, and what are the facilities or ready-made features available to deal with the content of arrays and objects. These are the things that we will learn tomorrow, because those are a little more involved pieces of JavaScript, but very powerful and very useful pieces of JavaScript. Okay, so let's stop our session today here. We learned a lot of basics about JavaScript, and we saw the example, we saw its use right now, and we are going to learn about objects and arrays tomorrow, and then apply that in our application here to create a more complicated web application with a lot of DOM uses and lot of style uses. We have not used style changes so far. We have not modified the style in this app. So we will do that tomorrow. Okay, so that's the end of today's session, unless you have questions for me. Okay, so we will progress on this. I will share the app code, the example that we are building with you today, and all the presentation material. Take a look at this and think about the complex features that I just hinted for tomorrow, and we will build this tomorrow together using the knowledge that we will gather on the fly. All right. See you again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you so much.